Alright, ready, my G. Bridge Nation. It's now time for the morning meds. And boy, I don't know. But like the morning meds, but it kind of make me nervous. Because you know, we talk about natural disaster and,
Yes.
and you know, tsunami and them things. You know, Jamaicans, when we hear you know, kind of, we get like nervous, you know what I mean?
Not a tsunami. All right, I'm gonna be serious.
Yeah, when we hear tsunami, you know what I mean, we get nervous, especially, you know, with the earthquakes and everything that's been happening. So, you know, naturally we have to reach out to the Jamaica Red Cross, you know, to just have a discussion about, you know, what's happening locally, you know, if we can even prepare ourselves for tsunami. And of course, we mentioned earlier that looming storms,
Yes,
you know, on the horizon as well. So it's just all about preparedness, Bridge Nation. And of course, on the line we have Kevin Douglas of the Jamaica Red Cross, just to ease our
some
thoughts.
of those,
And
share
make
some
feel
thoughts that, you know, that would feel more ready.
Exactly. Morning, Mr. Douglas.
Yeah, morning, man. How are you doing?
We're good, thanks. We're good, thanks. All right, so can you just, before we get into the discussion on, you know, the preparation and so on, can you just give us a brief intro as to your role as Emergency Services Manager at the Jamaica Red Cross and your experience in disaster preparedness?
Yes, no problem. So as I said, I'm the Emergency Services Manager for the Jamaica Red Cross. So I'm pretty much the head of disaster risk management. So I have the privilege of leading our preparedness efforts, our response, and of course, you know, our recovery efforts. So we work very closely with the government of Jamaica, in this case, particularly with the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management. So a lot of our work is concentrated heavily at the community level, helping local communities to prepare, as well as institutions. And so I have the privilege of leading the team of staff and volunteers all across Jamaica in this regard. I've been actively working in disaster risk management now for over 10 years. I've worked at the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, at the Disaster Risk Reduction Center at the University of the West Indies. And I've been a Red Cross volunteer for a couple of years, even before I became the Emergency Services Manager. So that experience has been pretty rich, and we're just hoping that, of course, we can continue to engender preparedness among persons, whether at the local community level, institutions, because the more prepared we are, then of course the better we'll respond and the less the impact of hazards will be on us.
Definitely. Now, as I listen to you, my mind goes to those things, that infrastructure that might be in place already. We have several stakeholders. Everybody is a stakeholder in natural disaster preparedness. But there are certain responsibilities that we expect of the government, and then organizations such as yours, you play a very vital role in preserving life and property. From your vantage point, what are the infrastructure in place? Are you comfortable? What is it that we can expect from a government and non-governmental organizations to do in terms of preparedness? And at the community level, do you think that there is preparedness at that level as well?
Right, so there is definitely some level of preparedness. Of course, there is certainly room for improvement. So in terms of disaster risk management, preparedness and coordination, certainly the government takes leadership in that. So the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management is the lead coordinating agency for disaster risk management, including preparedness mitigation. So including what is done before there's an impact, what is, you know, coordinating and leading how we respond while being impacted. And then, of course, afterwards, after an impact, how we best recover from that. So nationally, there's a National Disaster Risk Management Council, which is the highest decision-making body, which is chaired by the Prime Minister. And of course, many other actors, ministries of government, and so on. But when it comes to coordination and leadership, the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management leads that. Organization like the Jamaica Red Cross provides auxiliary support. We're actually celebrating 75 years this year. And throughout that time, we have committed to providing the kind of support to the ODPEM, to the government generally, in terms of helping local communities, helping organizations to prepare. And of course, when we are impacted, we also assist in terms of responding to impacts, whether it be hurricanes or flooding, landslides, whatever the hazards may be. And of course, it also help in terms of recovery efforts. At the local community level, where the majority of the work of the Red Cross is concentrated, we aim to provide the level of preparedness. So, for example, we work right across Jamaica. We have what we call community disaster response teams. We currently now have over 50 of these teams in vulnerable communities in which we go in and we, of course, work with the local community, work with the municipal corporations and ODPEM to actually train local community members in a variety of disciplines. So, for example, we train them in first aid, in life search and rescue, shelter management, damage assessment, working closely with the government, with organizations like the Fire Brigade and so on. And then, of course, once the communities are trained, then we also seek to equip these communities with the necessary tools to be able to respond. Because many of our communities in deep rural areas sometimes are cut off or marooned during storms and hurricanes and so on. So the idea is to prepare these communities at a level where they'll be able to respond in such a way, even if help doesn't get to them, they'll be able to still help themselves in that regard. And of course, we work also with families, helping families to develop family disaster plans and so forth. And of course, we also have our own national response plan. And we also have branches in every parish in Jamaica, which actually leads the disasters management efforts on the ground. So these are just some of the ways in which we provide support, but definitely the government is the one who leads in disasters management, preparedness, response, and recovery. But organizations like ourselves provide the necessary support so that we can be prepared and respond in the best possible way.
Understood. Now, Mr. Douglas, speaking about like the public's response to natural disasters, personally speaking, as an average Jamaican, personally, yeah, I feel like, all right, when it comes to hurricanes and floods, we used to it. Like we have an understanding of how to prepare ourselves. But of course, in light of what we saw recently with the earthquakes, and then of course, you don't know with earthquakes, we have to think about tsunamis. Are you seeing any vulnerabilities as it relates to our preparedness for disasters that we don't experience often?
Yes, definitely. So there are vulnerabilities, particularly with regards to tsunamis. So there's definitely a gap, for example, in public education and awareness. So a small island developing state like Jamaica, of course, the majority of us are coastal dwellers. We live very close to the coast. The majority of our assets are along the coastline. I mean, our airports, our oil refinery, the majority of our hotels, and so on. So the majority of Jamaicans live very close to the coastline. And so living close to the coastline presents a significant vulnerability in terms of tsunamis. And of course, we have had tsunamis before. So two of our most significant earthquakes, the 1692 Port Royal earthquake, the 1907 earthquake, we had tsunamis during those seismic events. So there is significant vulnerability. So there needs to be an increase, of course, in public awareness towards tsunamis, especially for persons who live along the coastline. Additionally, the government, for example, has done a lot of work, particularly in some communities with regards to tsunami awareness. So one comes to mind is Old Harbour Bay, which is to date the only community that has a tsunami warning siren in Jamaica. And I know the work that the ODPEM and the St. Catherine Municipal Corporation has done, because we also work in Old Harbour Bay very closely with the government. And so I think what we need really is an expansion of Old Harbour Bays in Jamaica, which is a tsunami-ready community that has a warning siren, that has had drills, for example, and simulations. And so the people are aware of the signs to look out for. So definitely this is needed, where a lot more of our coastal communities would be deemed tsunami ready. We will be having the necessary infrastructure, such as warning sirens, in these areas. So these would certainly add to the preparedness. Additionally, evacuation plans, for example, for our coastal communities, we certainly need a lot more of those. So a lot of these areas that has to do with the preparedness of the people, because of course, saving of lives is the primary focus of disasters management. And then of course, property comes after. And so having the people aware and very much sensitized, knowing the signs to look out for example, knowing their evacuation routes, how to move, where to move to. So a lot of these ventures will certainly increase the level of preparedness. So in that regard, there certainly is vulnerability and work to do regarding our population especially concerning tsunami hazards.
From your position, how much advocacy is there for that type of work to be put in? Because we're still grappling with just being ready for traditional hurricane season from June through November. We're still grappling with drain cleaning and such, having people living in vulnerable areas, riverbeds, and so on. How much priority do you think and focus can we give to expanding that type of warning system and getting people really keen on the need to be prepared for such an event?
Yeah, so there's definitely a need to expand that kind of advocacy, to expand that work. But there is work being done. As I said, we work across many communities, and so certainly in the communities that we work, you know, making the local communities aware of their risks. That's where we begin, because disaster risk management begins with understanding the threats, understanding the hazards to which you're vulnerable. And so certainly, for example, in the communities in which we work, as I mentioned, that we have our CDRTs and so on, we tend to, you know, provide that level of education and sensitization concerning hazard risks. And as I said as well, the ODPM does have programs working as well with the local authorities. But certainly there is a gap, as I mentioned, with only one community so far with a tsunami warning siren. So certainly there is definitely room for increased investment in terms of the necessary infrastructure. But work is being done, but definitely there is a substantial gap. And we have to get to the place where it's not just the ODPEM or the government or organizations like ours, but citizens associations, civil society, private sector, everyone basically has to realize that spreading this kind of knowledge and having the level of the necessary preparedness that is needed is really everyone's job throughout the country. And so definitely there is that gap, but work is being done, but absolutely more is needed to be done.
Are there any obvious signs that you can share with our audience this morning that you could look for as a warning for a tsunami?
Yes, absolutely. So especially for persons who live along the coastline. So if we're at the beach, for example, and you see abnormal behavior. So for example, the water receding, you know, going back. So where you see water, for example, and then you realize that it's as if the water is going back and you're seeing dry land where water was. If you hear, for example, like a loud roar, like sounding like a jet engine sort of coming from the ocean, the advice is to move quickly to higher ground, you know. We have seen in other parts of the world where people get curious if they see the water going back, rather than running to higher ground, they take their phones out and they will start to video. So if you're at the beach, for example, and you see the water receding, you hear like a loud roar, then please get to higher ground as quickly as possible. In other words, move as fast as possible away from the coastline, you know, with the greatest level of alacrity possible. All right. So so look for some of those signs. As I said, abnormal behavior in the water, like a loud sound. These are some of the most obvious signs. And of course, once you feel an earthquake, all right. So once there's an earthquake, and once you see that behavior of the ocean, the idea is to get away from the coastline as quickly as possible. Don't take the time to go back in the house and trying to get any property. The idea is to move immediately and away as far as possible from the coastline for safety.
Now, Mr. Douglas, before you go, I'm curious to find out about the Saving Lives Through Working with Nature project. Can you share some insight into that?
Yes, definitely. So over the last 5 years, the Jamaica Red Cross, we have been working a lot with what we call nature-based solutions, in that nature in itself provides. So the mangroves, for example, the forests, all these things that God created, they in themselves provide us with a level of protection. And so what we've been doing over the last few years, we had a project in partnership with the Nature Conservancy called the Resilient Islands Project, in which we work in Old Harbor Bay to build resilience, in other words, improve climate change adaptation capacity, and also reduce the risk, the disasters. Following on from the Resilient Islands Project, we have been working on a project funded by the USAID, Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, through the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, focus on the use of nature-based solutions. So in other words, how do you use nature? How do you use the natural things to reduce risks faced by local communities? And so we continue to work in Old Harbor Bay. We've also expanded into 2 other communities. These are Rock River in Clarendon and Woodford in St. Andrew. And so the idea is to work with the local communities and to identify the preservation of the natural environment. So, for example, for coastal communities, mangroves provide significant protection from storm surges. So, just for example, just 100 meters of healthy mangroves can reduce wave height by up to 2/3 during a hurricane. All right, if the coral reefs are healthy, that can significantly reduce, the wave potency in the upland watershed communities. If forests are healthy, that could significantly reduce landslide risks and so on. So the idea is to work with the local communities in these areas to preserve the natural environment, to restore, to help the communities to sustainably manage the natural resources, and of course to restore these resources so that the disaster risks can be prepared. As I'm dressed for the field today, as I leave here now, we'll be heading to Rock River in partnership with the Forestry Department and with RADA to continue the planting of timber trees in the Rock River community. Planting timber trees, for example, along the banks of the river can significantly reduce the threats of flooding from the river. So it's a matter of harnessing nature, harnessing the power of the natural environment to reduce risks. So it's not just seawalls and gabion baskets and these structural things. We're saying that there is much power, there's much value in using natural solutions. And these can be used together with hard solutions, but harnessing the power of nature to reduce disaster risks is a very powerful tool that we don't leverage enough in reducing the risks faced by local communities. And so this is the focus of the Greening Disaster Risk Reduction, Saving Lives Through Working with Nature project of the Jamaica Red Cross.
Definitely. All right. So listen, Sir Douglas, I've taken a wealth of information, but I'm heartened by the fact that the Red Cross is actively involved in getting communities aware and up to speed with what is with response to disaster risk management. My producer talking to me, getting me a little, But we appreciate the information, and we want to say thank you so much for taking the time to share with us this morning. For people who would like to get more information, are there websites or materials? What avenues are available to the public to access more information?
Yes, definitely. So persons can go to our website, www.jamaicaredcross.org. And of course, we are actively seeking for more volunteers. There is a Red Cross branch in every parish in Jamaica. Our headquarters is in Central Village in Spanish Town. We can go to our website, as I said, and information is there. The work that is being done by the Red Cross is there. And we're saying, please consider to come and volunteer with the Red Cross, all right? And how to volunteer can be accessed from our website. Whatever the skills are, the Red Cross will make use of you so that we can continue to build resilience at the local community level especially, and continue to provide the necessary support to our government. So please check out our website, or we can be reached at 984-786-0222. That's our headquarters. As I said, look up the Red Cross branch in your parish, and please consider go and volunteering.
All right, Mr. Kevin Douglas, Emergency Services Manager at the Jamaica Red Cross. We at the Bridge 99 FM. Thank you and your team for your work, and all the best going forward.
Yeah, man. Thank you as well. Too.
Yeah,
all the
man.
best.
Respect.
Yes.